Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this next video, which is going to focus on vendor-related transactions. So we're back at Appendix 6. And what I want to bring to your attention is that there are 3 different types of screens that you can use to capture vendor-related transactions. Now, as I mentioned in the previous customer-related transactions video, you have to identify each transaction to see whether they are vendor-related or customer-related. Now, I'm going to highlight in a different color, of course, what vendor transactions exist, and there are 3 different ways to capture vendor transactions. Let's look at the first one. The first one we're going to look at is a cash transaction. A cash transaction where you get the goods or the service and you pay for it immediately. And one such transaction is this one. So let's color it. So this vendor transaction is one where you purchase the service and pay upfront. Hence this check number. So if you recall from your project instructions, you were told that the first check for issue for 2021 is check number 5298, and there it is. Okay? So this is a cash transaction. Now, another type of way that you can pay a bill is by going to the ATM, taking out the money to the ATM and paying the bill, or going to a point of sale machine, using your card and withdrawing the money. Now, we have 2 such transactions that fall under that category. So these ATM withdrawals here, let's use a different color. This ATM withdrawal is also going to be referenced as a vendor transaction. And there's another one close by. Here it is. So one was on the 4th and one was on the 5th. Now, the last type of transaction, these are ATM or point of sale. ATM or point of sale transactions. Now, the last one we want to look at now is for a credit purchase, where you buy goods from your supplier and pay them at a later date. So you get the goods up front, but then you pay at a later date. And just like how we had the customer's credit sales spread over 3 separate steps, as indicated by my yellow marker, we are going to have a similar thing with the vendors. And this time, let me see what pretty color I'm going to use this time. Let's use green. Alrighty, so the first leg of this credit purchase is sending a purchase order to your supplier. So here is one on the 5th of January to Intel. So that is step 1. So in this vendor-related transaction, we're looking at first step in a credit purchase. So here you're sending in request for goods to Intel, who is your vendor, on the 5th of January. Now on the 7th of January, 2 days later, you get the goods from Intel. So apparently they have a very good courier service. It means, therefore, that when you receive these goods, Intel also sends their invoice. And in this case, their invoice number is 3000. Now, you're going to have to pay the bill, of course. And so, on the 22nd of January, you finally pay Intel for the goods you bought. So this three-step process kind of resembles what we did for BML, the customer. So just to connect the two, we had received a purchase order from BML on the 4th for some processors, but there was not enough in stock. And so the next day, you sent out a purchase order to buy those same 20 items. The items came in on the 7th from Intel, and you shipped it to BML the next day to fill their order, those 20 processors. So BML now eventually paid you on the 21st. Let's scroll down and find it, right? BML sends their check on the 21st, so you could now turn around and pay Intel for the same goods on the 22nd of January. All right? So notice the sequencing. But the point is that we have a series of steps. So I'm going to do the ATM transaction first, being the easiest, and then go to the cash transactions, and then find the credit purchases. Now, in this particular example, the blue one, for the ATM withdrawals, what you're actually going to have to do is to use a journal entry. So we're going back to the journal entry screen to capture this transaction. So let's make a note, it's the 4th. Remember now, it's easier for you to print off the transactions and have them on that piece of paper before you so that you can mark as you go along your progress. Okay, so on the 4th of January, you paid some money to Computer Society for their upcoming conference, and it was for $18,000. And on the 5th of January, the next day, you again went to the ATM to take out money for another $18,000 to pay for hotel accommodation. So let's go now to Sage and show you how we do that. Now, because it is a general journal, you don't necessarily have to use the Vendor and Purchases tab. We can go to Task, and we can go to General Journal Entry. Now the date is the 4th. And this would be General Journal number 3 or 4. Because you'd have done the opening entry, that is Journal 1. You'd have done the 3 depreciation, that's 2, 3, 4. So this should be GJ0, General Journal Entry number, entry 05. But at least you know that you have to do it sequentially, the coding. Now the conference, the 2 transactions, the 2 ATM withdrawals are in relation to a computer conference. Now the thing is, computer conference was not on your chart of accounts. It's not. So what are you going to do? You're going to click on your lookup button and go new. And you're going to add in that information. So I know it's going to be an expense. And I know I want to maintain the alphabetical sequence in the expense grouping. So I'm not just going to randomly put an account ID willy-nilly like that. I have to look at the sequence. So you'll notice that, you'll notice that we're starting with A, then we go to B, and I want to go to C. So if we're talking about computer conference, it must come after commissions, COMM, MNOP, right? It must have come after commissions and fee expense, but before depreciation. So I'm going to use the code 63600. So that's the ID code I'm going to use. It's not used before, so I can pick it up. And I'm going, oops, 63600 exists? Oh, it doesn't. So I'm going to call it computer conference because there are several expenses relating to the conference. But the main thing is it's a computer conference. The account type is fine, expenses. I guess because I use the code 6, the system assumes it's an expense, which means it's learning. Save and close. So what have I just done is I've just created computer conference on the fly, meaning as I go along. Now let me scroll back. It doesn't automatically pick up the new code as you create it. And so we have to look for it. There it is, computer conference. So this computer conference cost, the first one on the 4th of January, is for registration, conference registration. Because it's an expense, we're going to debit 18,000. And then the bank account is going to be credited. So let's look for the bank account. So it's 10,200. Notice that the system autofills for the description. Okay, so that completes our first example for making a payment to a supplier using an ATM or point of sale system. So we can go ahead and do save and new because we're going to go straight into the next transaction. All right, so my out of balance is 0. My debits and credits match. So I can go save and new. All right, so my next date is the 5th. My last journal was GJE05. So this next one will be GJE06. Let me click the arrow. Let's go new. It's not cooperating. So we're going to put the 5th of January, general journal entry 06. I'm going to use the same computer conference, but this time it's the same expense, but this time in the description, I'm going to say accommodation for conference. And I'm going to put the same 18,000 because the figure coincidentally is the same. My bank account is going to get the credit, sorry. And the description autofills as usual. Now before I click save and close, I want to draw your attention to coming. No. List. No. Let's go to, okay, I can't do it here. Let's go to save and close and we're done. So that marks that transaction. Okay. Now let us say that we're doing a cash transaction. It means therefore that we're going to use this button here that says write check. So you're paying for the goods up front. Now this is the first check that is being drawn. So again, Sage wants to find out which are the 2 bank accounts the money will come out of. So we're going to say BNS checking account. So from here on, in your time you're going to be doing write check, it will automatically know which one you're talking about, which bank account you want to use. Now let me go back to my Excel sheet, Appendix 6. So we've dealt with the blue transactions. Now let us look at the pink transaction. So this is a cash transaction, and as I said, we're going to be using the write check window. So this is in instances where you're paying for your goods and services upfront. There is no time delay in making the payment. So the date is the 2nd of January. And it's advertising expenses. It's check number 5298. And it's for 56,000. $744, and it's the RJR Communications Group. Okay, so now I have the transaction information. I'm going to jump back to Sage. So we're back in the right check window. If you remember, we went to vendors. In fact, let me go back there. So this is a vendor related transaction. So I'm going to click on the vendor and purchases tab, and I'm going to this window, right check, new check. Indicate which bank account. Notice if I click on the drop down arrow, you will see cash on hand and JMMB, and we are putting the money, we're taking the money out of the BNS checking account, so we click OK. Now, who are we paying? RJR Communications Group is not on your vendor listing. So again, we're going to have to add this on the fly. So I'm going to go new. So when I click on the magnifying glass, also known as the lookup button, I get an option to add a new customer, a new vendor, sorry. Who is the vendor? The vendor is RJR. So the maintain vendor window now pops up and we can autofill. So I'm going to use RJR as the vendor ID, and it's RJR Communications Group. And if you remember, I said there are only 3 basic pieces of information that you need to add. Well, really 2, and these are highlighted with field names in blue, the vendor ID and the expense. But I think that putting the name is also important. So I have included RJR Communications Group. Now, what is a connecting account? It has to be advertising. I don't know what the code is for advertising, so let's look if it's there. Aha, 6100. So it's already there. Great. So we don't have to add it in. All right. So I have my basic information for my vendor. I can now save and close. So when I'm back in my right check window, I have to now go back and look for my vendor, and here it is, RJR Communications Group. So notice that there is no address here because we never put it in when we were setting up the vendor on the fly. The what check number are we using? We're using check number 5298. That's our first check for your project. So the next check will be 5299, 5300, etc., etc. The date of the transaction is the 2nd of January. And the amount is 56,744. 56,744. We're using a check. Now, this memo field allows you to put commentary, notes, messages to yourself so that 1 month down the line, 5 months down the line, 2 years down the line, you will know exactly why this check was drawn. Okay, so this could have been advertising on Cool 97 FM for Valentine's. That's strange. It doesn't give you much space. All right, now here is the preset general ledger code that we had linked to RJR. But you have the option to do more. So rather than just having it advertising, in real life, we'd have had a GCT element on the RJR bill. And so we'd have been able to put it in the second line by simply clicking on the word split and adding more information, more debits to your check. Because remember now, with a check, you're going to be crediting bank, and you debit whether your expenses or whatever it is that would constitute the other lines in your transaction. Again, I'm going to check this little $sign to see what my situation is. Still 0 balance. All right. How is that so? Didn't I post? All right. But for what it is worth, this little $sign, if you click on it, it will give you an idea of the status of your transaction, your bank balance after the transaction is done. All right, so I'm done here. So let's quickly recap. We put in the check number, the date of the transaction, the amount of money involved, the payment method, a little note, but most importantly, the ID, the vendor ID. Now, if you have already done your vendor, then this will easily be on the drop-down list and you simply select it. Otherwise, you have to click on your lookup button and go new to create it if your vendor was not there. Alrighty, so I'm finished. Let's OK. And then we can save and close. So doing your cash purchases, which means that you're not paying at a later date for the goods and services that you get, the write check screen is the way to go. Or let's jump back into my appendix 6. So here's another such transaction which will require a write check window. Moore's Business Forms, I think they're now called Exomo. Moore's Business Form is not on your vendor listing, and so you'll have to add it on the fly, and you could link it to stationery or office supplies as the expense connected to Moore's. Because notice, remember, when you're setting up your vendor listing, all your vendors had to be linked to a particular general ledger account. All right, but in the interest of time, I'll not go through that with you. You can rewatch what I did with RGR in order to help you to do the one for Moore's Business Forms. But there are a lot of other vendors that are paid in this format. Now then, let us look now at a situation where you're setting up a vendor to get goods from them to pay them later. Once I complete the process, I'm going to come back to this transaction on the 3rd, because paid line bill here by check is not a write check, because line is already there in the system. Line is already there with an outstanding balance. You have a balance for them. And so once we have completed our credit purchase process, we'll come back and you'll know how to deal with the transaction on the 3rd of January. We're now 22 minutes into the video. Let's quickly now wrap up for the last leg. So I'm just making a note here. So the first step, on the 5th of January, you sent out a purchase order to Intel for 21 Proc. Then, on the 7th of January, you got the goods from Intel, and the invoice number was 3,000. Invoice number 3,000. The purchase order that you sent was purchase order number 100. And then a few weeks after, you paid Intel on the 22nd of January for that same invoice. All right, let's go into Sage and see how we do that. So here's the window to record the purchase order that you're going to send off to Intel. Here's the window you're going to use to record the bill or invoice that Intel sent you. And this is where we're going to eventually pay the bill on the 22nd of January. So let's click on this. So you're going to be creating a purchase order each time you want to get goods from your supplier. Let's maximize the window. We want Intel. Oh, it is telling me that Intel does not exist. All right, so let's create Intel on the fly. But you'd have done it already, of course. So the ID is INT. The name is Intel. And the expense is Computer Systems Inventory. Computer Systems Inventory. So we want to go up to the balance sheet section. That is not the code. Here we are. computer systems infrastructure. Okay, good. All right, so now that we have quickly created Intel, and remember, you'd have had them already. I'm just having to do this because I didn't set it up initially. All right, so now Intel exists on my database. So I can select it. Oh, I have it as Intech. That's so funny. All right, so let's put this in now. So we're doing the purchase order on the 5th of January. Now we've come to the date, 5th January. Now good through. Good through is just like ship by, but this time you're giving the instructions to your vendor that you don't want it later than. Now notice that there is a 30-day period because we have this for the 6th of January. It has automatically assumed a 30-day period. All right, the purchase order we're told should be 100, so that the next number purchase order will be 101 to keep the sequence going. How many items are you ordering? You're going to be ordering 20. Processors, let's put in the 20 items, and it is 1 proc, so I'm just going to type in 1P, and it should bring up all of the inventory items coded 1. I want 1 proc. So it autofills the description, brings up the cost of the item and the unit price. Notice that there's no GCT on this particular one. All right, so that's it. We have successfully entered our purchase order. So I think I can save and close. So having put in this purchase order, I now go to the Enter Bill window to record the receipt of the invoice from Intel along with the goods. So the vendor ID, let's put that in first, is Intel. And as I put in the vendor ID, the area under here goes gray. Let's put in the date. The date is the 7th. And notice that the due date for payment is 30 days, so it's matching the terms here. The invoice number, I'm going to ask you to put, this invoice number is the invoice number from Intel, which is 3000. So this is not an internally generated code. This is Intel's invoice, your vendor's invoice. Now, for you to record your vendor invoice, it must be linked to a previously created purchase order. So here we have the purchase order that triggered off this receipt of goods, and we are assuming all 20 are received. So I'm entering it in that column. And that wraps up the recording of our invoice from Intel. Now we're going to pay Intel. So we go to Pay Bill. I'm going to type in Intel. And when I do that, the outstanding bill you have for Intel pops up in the gray area at the bottom. So what check are you using to pay Intel? Because I'm doing this ad hoc, I'm going to have to be using the next check in the sequence, 5299. Date is 22nd of January. And the amount, rather than typing the amount, I'm going to click Pay, just as we did in the customer's set of transactions. So by clicking Pay, it assumes the full amount for invoice 3000 is going to be paid. It brings the figure up here. It puts it in words for you. The payment method is check, and again, the memo field allows you to put any little information there that you really want to remember about the transaction. Now, just as a side note, you don't always have invoices being paid. You could also be paying expenses. All right. So this is, so you can like JPS, you not really getting goods from JPS, you're getting a service. So you could come here to set up your JPS, to apply your payment, or just pay directly for your light bill without getting the light bill and not paying it until days after. But the thing is that this payment screen allows you to pay for invoices that are already in the system, as in the case with Intel, or it allows you to apply it to an expense. Okay? And you have the option of changing the account number relative to the expense you're paying. All right, so that is it for the vendors. So just to remind you, there are 3 ways that you can record payments to vendors. You can use a general journal entry for your ATM withdrawals and point-of-sale transactions. You can use the write check window and you can access it here. Or if you click on the drop-down arrow, notice that the write check option is also there. So you can access it here or up here. And lastly, you can use the pay bill option. But this pay bill option only works if you had entered an invoice earlier and it is there sitting and waiting for payment. All right, so that wraps up this particular video. I think that this should be it for me. Once you master these 3 methods, you've basically accounted for 90% of your vendor transactions. Now, there are some transactions that I have not mentioned. And what it means is that you're going to have to decide what kind of screen you're going to use. Now, I think I have one last video to do for you, which is loan amortization. Normally, I'd have done it at the beginning as the first video, but I don't think I did. And you do have a series of loans that you have to account for. And so for my final video, I will show you how to access the loan amortization schedule in Excel to determine how your loan repayments are going to be calculated. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so have a good rest of the day, and I'll see you in my next and the final, hopefully, final video. Okay, take care.